The sound of a passing car's engine hummed through the quiet street. It was an unusually calm night, one of those evenings where everything seemed peaceful, until it wasn't. Amina Blake stood on the front porch of her modest home, the cool evening breeze brushing her face as she balanced a grocery bag in her arms. The sun had just dipped behind the trees, leaving the world in twilight. She had been looking forward to a quiet evening with her husband, Jaxon, after a long day of work. But as she reached for the door handle, her heart skipped when she saw something unusual, a black car, parked just at the edge of their driveway. A man stepped out from the shadows, dressed in what appeared to be a police officer's uniform. His partner followed suit, and they both stood with their hands at their sides, not bothering to approach her just yet. Amina narrowed her eyes, sensing something was wrong. The men didn't look like ordinary officers. Their uniforms were slightly off, the badges were dull and scratched, and the way they stood was rigid, almost unnatural. They didn't speak immediately, but the taller man finally broke the silence, his voice cold and detached. "We need to search your house, ma'am," he said, stepping toward her. Amina's stomach dropped. Her first instinct was to refuse, but she held her composure, hoping she wasn't reading too much into the situation. She replied firmly, "No, I'm not letting you search my house without a warrant." The taller man smiled, a cold, empty smile, and his partner took a step closer, his hand twitching near his waist. The sight sent a chill down Amina's spine. Before she could protest further, the taller man suddenly reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the entrance. Amina recoiled in shock and pain, dropping the grocery bag. Apples spilled onto the porch, rolling away like little orbs of red. She could barely react before the man slapped her hard across the shoulder, his hand striking her with a force that sent her stumbling back. "Stop it! What do you think you're doing?" Amina shouted, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. But the two men ignored her cries. They just continued pushing her, trying to take control. As the taller man reached out again, Amina was ready to fight back. Her eyes were wide with panic, but something inside her stirred, a realization that she wasn't alone in this. Just as she braced herself for a struggle, the sound of an engine broke through the tension. Jaxon, he had arrived. Jaxon Blake had worked long hours as a Navy SEAL, and after a grueling day, he was eager to spend the evening with his wife. The drive home had been peaceful until he turned the corner and saw the strange black car parked outside his house. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the two men in uniforms on his porch, standing too close to Amina. His mind went on high alert, and the old training kicked in. He didn't rush in with anger, no. He needed to stay calm. His eyes quickly assessed the situation. The two men weren't wearing official police uniforms. Their badges were shoddy and worn, their movements too stiff. Something wasn't right. Jaxon slowed his truck, parking a few yards away. He stayed in the vehicle for a moment, watching, calculating. He saw Amina standing there, her eyes wide in fear, her shoulder bruising where the taller man had struck her. The sight made Jaxon's blood boil. But he didn't let rage take control. He stepped out of the truck slowly, his boots hitting the pavement with deliberate calm. The men didn't notice him at first. He approached carefully, his body language calm but purposeful. The taller man was the first to notice him. He turned, eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice edged with irritation. Jaxon's voice was steady. "I want you to back away from my wife, now." The two men shared a glance, then the taller one sneered. "And who the hell are you?" Jaxon didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked to Amina, ensuring she was okay. Then, he spoke, his voice firm and cold. "I'm her husband, and I don't appreciate you putting your hands on her." For a brief moment, there was an awkward silence. Then, the taller man scoffed, stepping forward. "You better watch yourself." But Jaxon didn't flinch. He stood his ground, watching the men carefully. He knew that something wasn't right, but he needed them to make the first move. And make it they did. The shorter man pulled out what looked like a baton from his belt. He moved quickly, but Jaxon had already seen the move coming. In one swift motion, Jaxon grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it until the baton fell to the ground. The shorter man grunted in pain as he dropped to his knees. The taller man, realizing the situation was escalating, lunged forward with a fist raised. Jaxon sidestepped, his movements quick and smooth, like water flowing around a rock. The punch missed, and with a precise motion, Jaxon tapped the man's elbow, sending him to the ground with a soft thud. The fight had been over before it had truly started. Amina stood frozen on the porch, her mind still spinning from the shock of being attacked. She looked at Jaxon, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and confusion. He had been calm, collected, and precise, never once losing control. She hadn't seen him fight like this before. He wasn't just her husband. He was a protector, a warrior who moved with a quiet, confident strength. She quickly dialed the real police, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Yes, I need help. There are 2 men here claiming to be officers, but they don't have proper badges. They just attacked me." The dispatcher reassured her that help was on the way, and Amina quickly put the call on speaker so that the 2 men could hear the truth. The taller man looked at her with hatred, while the shorter one started to shake. They were no longer the imposing figures they had tried to be. They were now the ones under control, at Jaxon's mercy. "Please, don't do this," the shorter man pleaded, his voice cracking. Amina's gaze was cold. "You thought you could scare me into submission? You thought you could take control of this house? You were wrong." Jaxon kept his grip on the taller man's arm, holding him in place without exerting any more force than necessary. "Stay down," he said calmly. "The real police are on their way. You'll be arrested for what you've done." The shorter man began to cry, and for a moment, Jaxon almost felt pity. But he knew better than to let his emotions cloud his judgment. These men had chosen this path, and now they had to face the consequences. The sound of sirens grew louder as the real police arrived. Amina let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The blue and red lights reflected off the windows of nearby houses, illuminating the street in a surreal, almost otherworldly glow. The officers stepped out of their cars with deliberate calmness, their hands open, clearly prepared for any situation. When the lead officer approached, Amina quickly explained what had happened. She pointed to the 2 men on the porch. "These men are not real police officers. They attacked me and tried to break into our home. My husband restrained them without causing harm." The real officers checked the fake badges. They exchanged looks of disbelief. One officer turned to Amina, his expression apologetic. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this," he said softly. "We'll take it from here." The 2 fake officers were quickly handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. One of them tried to claim that they were part of a private security group hired to investigate suspicious activity. But when the officers asked for documentation, the men had none to show. Their stories fell apart under the weight of truth. The lead officer turned to Jaxon, offering a nod of respect. "You handled the situation well. You showed restraint. Thank you for keeping things under control." Amina turned to Jaxon, her heart swelling with pride. He had been her rock, her protector. But more than that, he had been a beacon of calm in the storm, using his training to bring peace in the midst of chaos. In the days that followed, Amina and Jaxon received messages of support from their neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had seen the video online. A neighbor brought over a warm pot of soup, and another dropped off a bouquet of flowers. The community rallied around them, showing that even in the darkest times, people could come together. The local news even covered the story, but not in the way they expected. While some reporters wanted to sensationalize the violence, Amina and Jaxon kept the focus on the message of courage and resilience. They didn't want to glorify the fight. They wanted to show that strength wasn't about violence. It was about standing up for what was right, even in the face of fear. One evening, a letter arrived from a young man in a nearby city. He said he had watched the video and had been inspired by Jaxon's calm restraint. He wrote that he had been thinking about taking a dangerous path in life, but after seeing how Jaxon handled the situation, he had decided to turn his life around. He thanked them for showing him a different way. Amina held the letter in her hands, her eyes welling with tears. She passed it to Jaxon, who read it in silence. "We did something good," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We showed him there's always another way. We don't have to fight the same way the world wants us to fight. We can choose peace." As days passed, the initial shock of the attack began to fade, but the memory of it lingered in Amina's mind. Every time she stepped onto the porch, her eyes would briefly scan the street for any sign of danger. She found herself jumping at the sound of a passing car or any unfamiliar footsteps on the sidewalk. But each time, she was reminded of the strength she had discovered within herself, the strength to stand up for what was right, to refuse to be silenced. She was not alone. Jaxon, too, seemed to carry the weight of what happened differently. Though he remained the rock that Amina leaned on, there was a subtle change in him, something quieter and more reflective. He spent hours training at the gym, not just for strength, but to clear his mind, to maintain the inner calm that had helped him navigate the confrontation. But when he was home, he made sure to spend time with Amina, helping her face the lingering fear. Together, they found small moments of peace in their daily routine. One evening, after a long day, Jaxon sat down at the dinner table, his gaze soft but determined. "Amina, you're my strength," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "But I need you to know something. What happened that night wasn't just about us. It was about every person who ever felt small, every person who ever felt like they couldn't stand up. We gave them a chance to see that they have a voice too." Amina looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She reached across the table and took his hand. "We've seen the light, Jaxon," she said, her voice steady. "Now we have to pass it on." As the weeks went by, the incident became a turning point for both Amina and Jaxon, and their neighborhood began to change too. The word about what happened spread, and soon, the community was inspired by their courage. Amina's small act of standing her ground, combined with Jaxon's calm, powerful response, had planted a seed of hope in the hearts of many. Amina took the first steps, organizing weekly gatherings at their house. At first, it was just the neighbors, people they had known for years, but had never really connected with beyond the usual pleasantries. But something changed in the air after the incident. Conversations turned into deep discussions about fear, strength, and trust. People opened up about their own struggles and fears, and slowly, they began to realize that they weren't as isolated as they had thought. One evening, a middle-aged man named Leroy, who had lived on their street for years but rarely spoke to anyone, stood up during one of the gatherings. His voice was shaky, but it carried the weight of something deeply personal. "I've been watching all of you," Leroy began, looking directly at Amina and Jaxon, "and I've been thinking a lot about what happened to you. Amina, you didn't just stand up for yourself that night. You showed us all what it means to fight with dignity, with purpose, and not with violence." He paused, then added, "I'm not proud of this, but I've spent my life running from the problems I see. I've avoided confrontation. I've stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I thought it was easier that way. But seeing what you both did, well, it woke me up. I've decided I'm not going to hide anymore. I'm going to speak out, stand up for my family, for my neighbors. It's time to stop being afraid." The room went silent as Leroy sat back down. Amina and Jaxon exchanged a glance. This was what they had been hoping for, a ripple effect that would turn their personal victory into something greater. Leroy wasn't the only one to feel this shift. The gatherings grew in size, and soon, people were sharing ideas on how to create a safer, more connected community. They organized a block watch with kindness at its core, a group not built on fear, but on the shared goal of mutual respect and support. The news of the fake officers and the Blake family's bravery spread beyond their neighborhood. The local news station picked up the story, but they didn't focus on the sensational aspect of the confrontation. Instead, they highlighted the courage it took to confront injustice without giving in to anger. At first, the reporters wanted to paint Jaxon as a hero in the traditional sense, someone who fought back with force, someone who stood tall in the face of danger and fought for what was his. But Amina, knowing that their story was about something much deeper, intervened. She told the reporters the real story, the one about choosing peace over violence, about controlling fear with calm strength. "This isn't about physical strength," Amina explained on camera. "This is about emotional strength. It's about knowing that no matter what happens, you don't lose yourself. You don't lose your dignity. You don't let fear control you. We have a choice, and we chose to stand firm." The interview went viral. People across the country shared it, leaving comments of admiration and support. They saw not just a couple who had faced danger, but two people who embodied resilience, dignity, and hope. The story became a beacon for anyone who had ever felt small or powerless. As the days went by, a letter arrived for Amina and Jaxon. It was from a young man named Tyler, who had recently gotten out of prison. He had been following the news and felt moved by their story. "I've spent most of my life running from my past, trying to escape the mistakes I made. I thought I was too far gone, that I could never do something good again. But watching your story, I saw that there's always a way forward, always a way to make things right. I've signed up for a job. I'm turning my life around. You helped me see that I can do better." Amina held the letter close to her heart. She passed it to Jaxon, who read it silently. "We made a difference," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. One morning, Jaxon received a letter from the court regarding the two men who had attacked them. The trial date was set, and they were to testify against the men who had tried to break into their home. It was time to face the past once again, but this time, Jaxon wasn't afraid. He knew the power of the truth. He knew that standing up for what was right was the only way forward. When the day of the trial came, Amina and Jaxon arrived together, their hands firmly clasped. They walked into the courtroom, not as victims, but as people who had taken control of their destiny. As the fake officers were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, Amina felt a surge of emotion. These men had thought they could break her. They had underestimated the strength of her spirit. They had underestimated the power of a woman who refused to be silenced. The court proceedings were straightforward. The men pleaded guilty to all charges, and their defense was weak. They tried to claim they had been hired by a private security group to investigate suspicious activity, but when the real police officers showed up to testify against them, their lies fell apart. The judge sentenced the men to serve time for impersonating officers, assaulting Amina, and attempting to force their way into their home. The courtroom was quiet as the sentence was read aloud, but Amina felt a sense of finality settle in her chest. She had stood up for herself. She had stood up for what was right. And now, justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, Amina and Jaxon continued their mission of spreading hope and strength to others. They had seen the power of standing up for what was right, and they knew they had to continue to use their story to inspire others. They worked together to organize community events, where they spoke about the importance of standing tall in the face of fear and adversity. They taught others how to channel their anger into positive change, how to fight with dignity and purpose, just as they had done. Amina's passion for community grew, and she started volunteering at local youth centers, teaching kids about courage, strength, and empathy. She helped them find their voices and understand that no matter what challenges they faced, they could always choose a different path. One day, while Amina was helping organize an event for at-risk youth, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was Leroy, the man who had spoken up at one of their gatherings months ago. He approached her with a nervous smile. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "I'm doing things differently now. I'm teaching my kids what you taught me, to stand up for what's right, no matter what. I'm proud of the man I'm becoming." Amina smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle deep in her heart. She knew that their fight wasn't just about protecting themselves. It was about protecting their community and helping others find their strength. Months later, a letter arrived. It was from a woman named Linda, who had seen the video of Amina's interview. Linda had been in an abusive relationship for years, living in fear every day. But after watching Amina speak with such strength and calm, she found the courage to leave. "I never thought I could escape," Linda wrote. "I thought I had no power, no voice. But seeing your story made me realize that I do have a choice. I've left my abuser, and I'm starting fresh. Thank you for showing me that I have the strength to make a change." Amina read the letter aloud to Jaxon, her voice breaking as she spoke. "We've changed lives, Jaxon," she said quietly. "We've made a difference." Jaxon wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "We've given people hope," he said. "And that's the greatest gift we can give." As the years went on, Amina and Jaxon's story continued to inspire those around them. They had built something stronger than a reputation. They had built a legacy of strength, resilience, and courage. Their community had transformed into a place where people stood together, where fear no longer had the power to control them. Amina and Jaxon had turned their pain into a beacon of light, guiding others toward a path of self-respect and love. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Amina and Jaxon sat on their porch together, watching the world go by. The neighborhood had become a place of unity, and they knew they had played a part in creating that change. "We did it," Amina said softly, leaning her head on Jaxon's shoulder. "We did," Jaxon replied, his voice filled with quiet pride. "And we'll keep doing it." The two of them sat in peaceful silence, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would always face it together with courage, strength, and love. As time moved on, the changes in their neighborhood were profound. The weekly gatherings continued, and the once quiet street was now alive with conversations about justice, strength, and community. People from different backgrounds, some of whom had never spoken to one another, now gathered together to share their stories, to teach their children, and to protect their shared space. Amina and Jaxon had become symbols of resilience and hope. However, even with all the progress, not everything was smooth sailing. There were still whispers of doubt from people who hadn't fully embraced the idea of community unity. Amina had noticed it in a few conversations, small comments, questioning the idea that kindness could combat fear. "You can't be soft in this world. People will take advantage of that," someone had said to her once. But Amina didn't shy away from these comments. She knew that change wasn't easy. She knew it required persistence, and that sometimes it took time for people to realize that true strength wasn't in dominating others. It was in lifting others up. One night, as they prepared for another community event, Amina and Jaxon had a quiet conversation on the porch. "You know, not everyone gets it," Amina said, her tone thoughtful. "Some people still believe that being strong means using force." Jaxon nodded, his eyes focused on the night sky. "I know, I hear it sometimes. But you can't stop people from learning in their own time. We just keep showing them a better way. We don't stop." Amina smiled at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You're right. We just have to keep going, no matter what." As they continued their work in the community, life had begun to feel like a steady rhythm for Amina and Jaxon. They were slowly rebuilding the world around them, teaching others the lessons they had learned through hardship. But one afternoon, that rhythm was interrupted when a knock echoed through their door. Amina opened it, and standing before her was a man in a suit, looking slightly out of place on their porch. "Hello," he said, introducing himself as Marcus Harding. "I've heard a lot about you and your husband. I'm here to offer you something, an opportunity." Amina's curiosity piqued, and she invited the man inside. "Opportunity?" Jaxon raised an eyebrow. He wasn't one to trust easily. "What kind of opportunity?" Marcus smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm with a non-profit organization dedicated to community safety. We want to offer you a platform to share your story. We believe that you two could help us lead a nationwide campaign, focusing on unity and strength without violence." It sounded like a good cause, and for a moment, Amina felt a spark of hope. But then she caught something in the man's demeanor, a slight hesitation, an air of calculation. She exchanged a glance with Jaxon. "What's the catch?" Amina asked, not letting her guard down. Marcus hesitated for a moment before replying. "There's no catch. It's just, well, let's say that we want to reach the widest possible audience, and we have the funding to make it happen. You'd be perfect for it." Jaxon wasn't convinced. "Funding? And what exactly do you expect from us?" Marcus's smile faltered for a brief second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Just your participation. We'll handle the rest. It's a partnership. Together we can create a nationwide movement." Amina and Jaxon exchanged a long, silent look. "We'll need some time to think about this," Jaxon said, his tone cautious. As the man left their home, Amina felt a gnawing doubt. Everything had been going so well. Why would anyone come to them now, offering so much, without something more underneath the surface? Over the next few days, the offer lingered on their minds, but it didn't sit right. The idea of leading a national campaign to spread their message was undeniably tempting. They could reach so many people, inspire even more. But was this the right path? And what did Marcus mean by partnership? They had always trusted their instincts, and right now, something told them that this wasn't the right move. During a walk that evening, Amina voiced her concerns. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady. "What if we're getting involved in something we don't fully understand? What if we lose control of the message?" Jaxon thought for a moment, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "I feel the same way," he admitted. "There's something off about it. People don't just come knocking on your door with a partnership like that, especially when we're already doing something good in our community." Amina nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. She had always believed that their power came from their authenticity. The way they had created change wasn't because they had a platform or a sponsor. It was because they spoke from the heart. And she wasn't willing to risk that. After much discussion, Amina and Jaxon made the decision. They wouldn't accept Marcus's offer. The campaign might have been an easy way to spread their message, but it wasn't the way they wanted to do it. They had always believed in the power of community starting small, building from the ground up. They weren't about to let anyone take control of their story. The next morning, Amina called Marcus and politely declined his offer. "Thank you for considering us," she said. "But we're going to continue with what we've been doing. We're not looking for fame or a platform, we're just looking to make a real difference." Marcus's voice was cool on the other end of the line. "I understand," he said, though there was a hint of irritation in his tone. "But don't say I didn't offer you the chance." Amina hung up, a sense of relief washing over her. She knew they had made the right choice. They didn't need anyone's help to make their voices heard. The weeks that followed were a reminder of why they had chosen their path. Instead of focusing on mass appeal or a nationwide campaign, Amina and Jaxon doubled down on their local efforts. They spent more time at the youth center, more time mentoring young people, showing them the same lessons that had helped them stay strong. They worked with local schools to incorporate community-building programs that focused on understanding, empathy, and strength through nonviolence. One day, as Amina was sitting with a group of students, one of the young girls, an 8th grader named Kira, raised her hand. "I just wanted to thank you, Amina," Kira said shyly. "Before I met you, I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I used to just let people push me around. But now, I know I don't have to let anyone control me. I have my voice." Amina smiled at her, proud of how far Kira had come. "You already have strength, Kira," she said. "Sometimes you just need to realize it. The power was in you all along." As their community grew, Amina and Jaxon found themselves in positions to give back in ways they had never imagined. They hosted workshops and events that brought together families, neighbors, and even people from other neighborhoods. They spoke on panels, not as experts, but as people who had lived through adversity and come out stronger on the other side. One evening, after a particularly powerful workshop with local parents, a young man approached them. He introduced himself as Tyler, the same man who had written them the letter months ago. He was dressed in a simple suit, his eyes bright with hope. "I just wanted to say thank you," Tyler said, his voice full of sincerity. "Because of you, I've turned my life around. I've been working at a local business for the past few months. I've started helping out at a youth center. And every time I do something positive, I think about what you taught me, that it's never too late to change." Amina felt a lump form in her throat as she listened. "Tyler, we're proud of you," she said quietly. "You're doing the work now. You're making a difference." Years later, the neighborhood was thriving. The work Amina and Jaxon had started was now a part of the foundation that held their community together. They had seen children grow into strong, empathetic leaders, and families had learned the value of support and togetherness. They had set out to change their corner of the world, and somehow, through patience, kindness, and determination, they had done just that. One afternoon, as they sat on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Amina turned to Jaxon, her heart full. "We did it, Jaxon," she said softly. "We made a difference." Jaxon smiled, pulling her close. "We always knew we could," he replied. "Together, we're unstoppable." And as the world around them continued to change, Amina and Jaxon knew one thing for certain: no matter what came their way, they would always face it with the same strength, courage, and love that had guided them from the beginning. The story of Amina and Jaxon Blake would never truly end. It wasn't the kind of story that wrapped up neatly in a bow. Instead, it was a living legacy, one that would continue to grow with each new person they inspired, each new life they touched. It was a legacy built on standing tall in the face of fear, on choosing peace over violence, and on lifting others up when the world tried to tear them down. And as their children grew up, they would pass this message along to the next generation, ensuring that the flame of hope would never die. The strength of a community lies not in its ability to fight, but in its ability to rise together strong, united, and unbreakable. And that, they knew, was the greatest legacy of all.